For this assignment, we're going to merge two photos, and we're going to practice using a supplied photo, and then later on we'll create our own and merge them together. And here's what we're going to do. Go to Google Classroom, open up this assignment, and before you click on the link down here, we're going to select this text because this is the file name. This is how I want it named. Merge Pitt _ where it says a student, you're going to put your first initial and last name. The first hashtag is what grade you're in. The second hashtag is what period you have art. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to open up this document. When you first open the document, you notice all these blue lines on here. These are actually ways to measure online on this Photopea assignment, on this Photopea project. If I turn off Brad Pitt's layer by clicking this eyeball, you can see that the tiger is kind of lined up the same way. Just below where Brad Pitt's hairline is this line here, which is near the top of the tiger's head. About where the tiger's chin is down here is about where Brad Pitt's chin is. To toggle these blue lines on and off, hold the Control key down and tap the colon, which is right next to the letter L on your keyboard, and those blue lines will go away. Tapping them again, Control colon, brings them back up. So that's how you get the blue lines off before you start editing the image. You'll notice that this is very similar to another paint program we've used in class. There are layers, and in this particular instance, we've got an image of Brad Pitt, another image on the layer down below it called Tiger, and the image below that is a background image that I scanned from a royalty-free CD that I bought. So I'm going to turn these two layers back on. The very first thing we're going to do is we're going to add what's called a layer mask. To find the layer mask, click on the link, and then down here there's a series of icons. If you ever wonder what each one of these does, you can stop and roll over and pause for just a moment, and it'll tell you what it is. And this is the one we want. We want to add a layer mask. So I'm going to click here, and you'll notice as soon as I click, another box is going to pop up here. We're going to do the same thing for the layer called Tiger. So now we've got two layers with masks and the background layer behind it. The best way to think about a mask is that you're going to cut a hole in this picture, but since we don't want to delete the picture itself, it's just we're going to be able to see through it. So notice that there's a dotted line around the photo here. We don't want to affect the picture, so we've got to select the mask by clicking over here. Then I'm going to click on the brush tool, and as I erase, you'll notice the picture behind it coming through. And as soon as I release the mouse, you'll notice over here on the right-hand side, there will be information here. So I'm going to let go of the mouse way over here. And notice you can see the black area here. That's what's been cut out of this mask. So what we're basically going to do is we're going to cut half of the face of the actor out of this picture using this tool. I'm going to zoom in by pinching open this image. Notice how this is a very sharp line. Rather than having a sharp line, though, what we want is we want a very smooth transition from the tiger face to the actor's face. I'm going to hit Control-Z a couple of times on my keyboard to get rid of all of that mask that we just created. Up here at the top, I'm going to click here where this little number 15 and this down triangle is. This is the default paintbrush. It's got the hard edge on it. I'm going to click on this one to the left, and then I'm going to click over here. The other thing I'm going to do is increase the size of the brush. There's a couple of ways to do it. One way is to click over here. This is currently 15 pixels wide and tall. If you want, you can stretch it over here like this, and then you can see visually how big this brush is. So I'm going to use this one for now so that you can see the difference between the hard-edged brush and this brush. You can already see, and I'm going to zoom in again so that you can see the transition here. So you can see the transition of the tiger's face, including the details of the fur, as it transfers over into the actor's face. Now here's why we use a mask. If I make any mistakes on here, and I've got this selected, let's say I accidentally went across here. If I had erased the picture from the photograph, I'd have to start over from scratch. But if you notice down here on these two chips, one of them is a black and the other is a white, I'm going to tap the X key on my keyboard and watch them switch over. Now white is on top and black is on the bottom. Again, making sure that you're on the mask, not on the photo. Now when I paint, it's going to bring back or cover up that hole that was in the mask. I'm zooming in by holding the control key down and tapping the plus on the keyboard so that I can zoom in. If I need to move around the picture, I can hold the space bar down and move the picture around. Remember, I'm not moving the picture, I'm moving the view of the picture. So nothing's actually physically moving on the picture itself. And now when I go back here, I'm gonna start erasing again. So I'm gonna hit the X key again so that black comes in on the top. And I'm gonna carefully move this over. This brush is probably too big because you can see how much of the image it's erasing over here. The other way that I can reduce the size of the brush is by tapping the bracket tool, which is just to the right, the bracket key, which is just to the right of the letter P on your keyboard. And notice how the brush now gets smaller and I have more control. It's still going a little bit far, so you have to play around with it. I'm just going to tap Command Z on my keyboard and maybe move the brush way over here so that as I brush down over, I can have a little more control about how far over it erases. So ultimately, I'm going to erase all of the right-hand side of this picture, right down the center. Now, the other thing we want is we want to be able to see this background around the other two characters. The tricky thing here is you have to erase it from both layers. So I'm going to go to this layer here where the tiger is. Again, I'm clicking on the layer mask. And now when I erase or mask, it's going to reveal the flame colored background behind the tiger. You're going to want to be kind of careful in here when you do this. Notice how when I'm trying to erase here, it's not erasing that gray area. That's because it's on this layer. In fact, if you look closely, you can actually see that little white piece right there in the layer mask. So I have to click on this layer mask to erase that one. Spacebar, moving the image around. Making sure, again, I'm always working with the layer mask, not on the image itself. Now, the other thing I want you to focus in on here is I want you to get as much of the shagginess of the hair as possible. So I'm going to reduce this brush way down. I'm going to turn off the Brad Pitt layer so that I can focus in on this area. And you can actually zoom in pretty tight. You can start to see the pixels here, the jagged rectangles, squares. And I'm going to get that brush really tiny so that I can start focusing in on the individual hairs of this tiger. Again, you can zoom in really tight and just go in here and start painting around this area. Notice how it's a lot brighter here than it is here? That's because we used a large fuzzy brush there. You can come back later after doing all these details, enlarge your brush by hitting the right bracket tool, and then you can clean up that area. You also might want to switch at this point to the other brush so that it gives you a harder edge just outside where the area is of the tiger's hair. There's one other thing that you can do to this. I'm going to hit Control-0. For now, I'm going to get rid of this mask, this layer mask, by dragging that into the trash can over here. And this is all going to come back because there's one other way that you can delete a lot of the white but leave this hairy fuzziness, and that's by using the magic wand tool. I'm going to click on the magic wand tool, make sure that I'm on the tiger layer, and click one time here, and it's going to select all of that area. When I click on the Add Raster Layer Mask, watch what happens. Now, what it did was it deleted what was selected, which in this case was the reverse of the tiger. So I'm going to do Control-Z to bring that back. Because remember, it's cutting a hole. You can see the dotted line. This is the area that's selected. But because it's a layer mask and not cutting from the layer itself, it's cutting out the tiger. The way around that is to go to the Select menu and choose Inverse. Now you'll notice that when I select the tiger layer, click on Layer Mask, it's going to take out the area around the tiger, which is what I want. So that when I turn back on the Brad Pitt layer, you can see all of this area here is masked out. But again, the nice thing about it is, since I did it on a mask, if I need to get any of that information back, I can just tap the X key and then bring it back. And again, this is a hard brush that I don't want, so I'm going to do Control-Z to get it more fine. I'm always checking to make sure that I'm on the layer mask. I'm going to zoom in again to where all of the tiger hair is. I'm going to change the brush to a really small brush. This is a 1 pixel brush, which is way too small. And you could actually play around with this, with the size of the brush. It just depends on how fine you want to get. Sometimes it's hard to spot the brush, so you might want to enlarge it a bit first. So I got the brush this large. Now that I know where it is, I'm going to hit the left bracket tool and reduce it down. And you can literally reduce this down to 1 pixel if you want to. It's currently set to bring back the area of the mask, so I have to hit the X key again to take away from the mask. And so now I can play around and get rid of some of this white stuff that's on the edge. And again, you can get as fine as you want on this. It all depends on the resolution of the image. This is not a super high resolution image, but it's enough for our purposes because we're not printing this. We're just using it on our website in our portfolio. The other thing that's a little bothersome about this is I don't necessarily want Brad Pitt's hair in here. So I'm going to go back up to this layer mask, click on the brush, enlarge the brush, make sure that it's the smooth brush, not the hard brush. And then I can continue around to play with the top of his head and actually put the tiger's ear in there also. Now here's a case where you might want to consider leaving Brad Pitt's hair, but deleting the tiger. So what I'm going to do is, since I want more of his hair on here on this side to blend in, I'm going to click the tiger layer mask. I'm going to zoom in over here on the left-hand side. And I'm going to be very careful in making the brush small enough to get these details around Brad Pitt's hair. And again, the nice thing about this, cutting away from the layer mask, is you can kind of go back and forth to get the details. Since it's not erasing from here, that means there's something I have to take out of the Brad Pitt layer so that I can see both the orange background and the places where Brad Pitt's hair is going to be. So you're going to have to go back and forth to the layer masks frequently. And this is where the X key comes in real handy. Because again, you're going to play around with this, remove as much of this as possible while leaving Brad Pitt's hair. And every time you run into a place where you can't see it, like this gray area right here, it means I have to delete it from the Brad Pitt layer as well. Then once you're satisfied that you have as much as you want removed, you can back up a little bit. I'm just trying to get some of this fine detail in here where the whiskers are right next to Brad Pitt's hair, because I really want to focus on this side more on Brad Pitt than I do on the tiger. Again, you have to go back and forth a couple of times because you might not be sure. It gets a little confusing as to which image you're erasing from. Every time something doesn't erase, just switch the layer mask and go back to the other layer until you can erase all of this. So you're going to do some back and forth on this. I'm going to leave this off now, just so that this video isn't super long. You just have to know that you're playing only in the layer mask area. And once more, the reason that you do this is because if you make a mistake, like if I go too far into his head right here, I can tap the X key to reverse it, and then I can go back over and fill that area in again. So it might get a little confusing going back and forth like this, but just play around with it. As long as you are erasing from the layer mask, you can always fix it. And so this assignment is primarily getting you used to using layer masks instead of erasing the picture. So when you turn in your final Photoshop file, I want to see the Photoshop file, not the finished flattened JPEG. This still has a lot of work to do, but again, what I want to do is I'm going to do File, Save as PSD. It should automatically go to your Downloads folder. It's already named this. This was the name on the file from Photopea. But since I copied that text from Google Classroom, I can hold down the Control key and tap in the letter V, and it's going to put that information in there. This is how I want the file named. Remember where it says A student, you're going to put your first initial and last name. So if this were me, I would put in JWING. The first hashtag is what grade you're in. I'm just going to say 8. The second hashtag is what period. In this case, I'm going to put 4. It's still in the Downloads folder, so I'm going to click Save. And the reason we do this, saving it as a PSD file, is there's a lot of work still to be done on this image. If I flatten this file, I wouldn't be able to make those same edits. So for the time being, I have this file saved on my computer. I can close this window. And then once it's finished, I can upload it to this assignment. Remember that when you're doing this type of work and you're watching the video while you're doing the work, that you can pause the video and tab back and forth between the open document in Photopea and the video. If you have any questions, you can ask them in Google Classroom or talk to me during class.